DJing tonight. So we are going to handle the show again. This is I believe, our third show, and Thursday nights 9 o'clock. Tune in, and with my great panel, we have Paul, just a fan. Paul, what's up, buddy? How are you?
How you doing, Nick?
We have Chris Russo, extraordinaire, media giant. Chris, what's going on, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you.
Thank you. And then from the band, the greatest college basketball band in the nation, Seton Hall Pirate basketball band, Nick Morgan, and he knows our women's team as well as anyone. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Good. How are you?
And then joining us while she's in the background watching the hockey game tonight, the one and only USA, Nicole Gizzi. Nicole, how are you tonight?
I am pumped up right now. It's 1-1.
Oh, okay. What first period?
First period, there is 1:26 left on my end.
Who scored for the U.S.?
I believe it was
Brady.
So we're gonna start. Last night, one of the best teams in the country, with who I think is the best player in the country, Paige Beckers, invaded Walsh for a marquee matchup, and I was there, and Chris was there covering the game, and Nick Morgan was there. And I have to tell you, it was an electric atmosphere. It was a big game atmosphere. Seton Hall stopped up their normal security because last year when UConn game, actually the last 2 years, I mean, every little girl in the building after the game wanted to get Paige a picture. Paige was out there for a whole hour. This year, that didn't happen. They had a lot of security. It was hard to get downstairs if you didn't have a ticket, which is unheard of in Walsh. So it had a definite big game feel to it. And I think that, we came out and we hung in there for a little while, but then just like an assassin, Paige just, she just, in all facets of her game, points, rebounds, assists. Chen girl had a good game. Adrian Griffin's daughter had a good game. The Fudd girl had a really good game. They just, outclassed us. I mean, they just have so much talent on that team. And we were just talking before we went on the air, about the disparity of talent in the women's game. We're a bubble team. If we were to play, a ranked team, a top 5 team on the men's side, I don't know, maybe a 10-point game at home, something like that. On the women's side, the talent gap is just so enormous, a 40, 50-point route. And, there's nothing you can do. I mean, Coach Bozzella, he's a very good coach. The team was prepared. He just ran into a juggernaut. I mean, and our schedule all year, we were just saying, we lost 3 games. LSU, USC, UConn. They could be number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, I wasn't, and then after the game, Gino was Gino. And there was, before we do anything else, there was a little press conference, and our own Chris Russo attended. Chris, thoughts on and what was going on? Give us behind the scenes look at the press conference.
Yeah. So what's funny is I had actually been in a press conference with Gino Auriemma and Coach Bozzella before my senior year. It was before UConn had rejoined the conference. It was a fascinating look just to see UConn back just for one game in the non-conference schedule. And he commands a room. It is fascinating to watch him work. And then obviously the elevated media presence there is really incredible. We were actually relegated to, for good reason. We were relegated to the, behind the crow's nest. I believe opposite your seats, as a matter of fact, Nick. And so, look, the press conference itself, it was Caitlin Shen, it was Paige Beckers, and it was Gino Auriemma. And then later on, Coach Bozzella came in. I got to ask Coach Auriemma for a moment, and he was very responsive to this question. I asked essentially about how important the trap defense really was in that game, because UConn's front court defense was incredible in that game. And he said, look, I'm amazed at what our players are able to do sometimes. And he said Paige is especially good at that, which just shows, again, she really played a complete game. Now, the upside, if you're Seton Hall, they made Paige Beckers play a full 3 quarters, which sounds short, but I mean, compared to the game they had at UConn, it was very heartening if you're a Seton Hall fan. And I think Coach Bozzella could sense that because, look, even though, UConn's beaten them 41 times in a row, UConn's beaten a lot of teams 41 times in a row. And you know what? I think he still felt very heartened. And I had mentioned, even in the press conference, truth is, they played in total, they probably actually played 20 really good minutes of basketball. I would say up until the midway point of the second quarter, and I would say from halftime up until the midway point of the third quarter, they played a really good basketball. But Coach Bozzella said that really that part of it, and he said this is not an excuse, it's just a fact that our team is still worn down, still ill. And now I could say publicly, as I could not mention last time, but the team has made public that it was Savannah Catalan that Savannah Catalan had the flu, and that's why she missed that last matchup. And so apparently a couple of players are coming off illness. And so Coach Bozzella said, look, that's not an excuse, but it is part of it, whatever. Again, it's a 42-point game. But I think he ultimately still understood the situation, felt very heartened, said, I still think we're one of the 68 best teams in the country. I understand there are great conferences, these conferences like the CAA, things like that. They're good conferences, but a lot of these, it doesn't matter what the net ranking is. A lot of these teams aren't ever ranked, and these teams don't have to play UConn twice a year. We do. And so I think he's still very hard. The truth is, look, they were in it for 20 minutes against UConn. They were in it for at least one of those games against Creighton, and every other team they've played well. He has said they're the third best team in the conference. And I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if they play them again, if the score is a lot more narrow. You know what? I think he pretty much said, and it's true, you've got to play a perfect game to beat them. Seton Hall is, whether they're capable of that, not quite sure. But I think the thoughts were, relatively speaking, I think still pretty positive on the Seton Hall side. UConn understood they played kind of sloppy for those 20 minutes or so. But they also understood that they understand they do not underestimate their opponent. It doesn't matter if they've beaten Seton Hall 41 times in a row. They don't underestimate their opponent. They know what Seton Hall has. So overall, just a very interesting evening. I think there were ultimately, regardless of the margin, positives on both sides.
I think you asked a great question at the press conference, and I was watching that game, and I was thinking the same thing with the trap, and I think that's where she's different than Caitlin Clark. Here you have your best player, and she's hustling and she's playing defense, and instinctively she knew over when to trap the ball, and it was giving Jada Ease and Savannah Catalan fits all night, and that was the difference right there. I don't know how many points they scored in transition, but it was quite a few. Nick Morgan, you had a courtside seat, one of the best seats in the house last night. What were your thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I mean, I loved the first quarter energy and starting off to that 5-0, that lead that we had. I think that was kind of what we needed to kind of keep the momentum going, at least for a little bit at the time being. We had a good first quarter. We had a good first couple of minutes. I think, we are kind of seeing Faith Masona struggle a little bit more. We don't know if, especially down below, like right under the basket, she's struggling. She's not making the shots that she was earlier on in the season, especially early in Big East conference play. So maybe that's something to look out for. We don't know if maybe that's, nerves, maybe she's getting guarded a little bit differently or whatever the case may be, or maybe she's trying to distribute the ball a little bit more. But Faith definitely looks a little bit different from down below. She's not getting the looks, the shots off, or the points that she's been tallying up. I think Ayanna Lopes really impressed yesterday. I think she had some really great baskets. That three-pointer, that second score of the game for Seton Hall that she had, she was getting a look early on in the game, and she got consistent passes. We trusted her to take a shot and to kind of keep us back in this game or bring us back in the game or cut the deficit to whoever it may have been at the time. So I like that Yaya was getting the ball a bit more and that she looked at least a lot more comfortable and confident out there shooting wise. We did expect the size and Messiah Hunter and Ramani Parker to play a little more of a role last night minute wise. We did get that a little bit as well. But Paige Beckers was definitely on Jada Eads. I mean, the defense alignment for UConn obviously switched quite a bit throughout, but Jada Eads definitely had a hard time in the second half. They were really ganging up on her and making it difficult because she was the go-to girl last night for the Pirates, as she tends to be. And I know we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, so this isn't really gameplay related. But Paige Beckers, to the best of my knowledge, did come back out afterwards. She waited about 15, 20 minutes. I know some of my friends ended up getting pictures with her on the court.
Oh, wow.
She did go back out to see fans. I'm assuming she was there for quite a while, but a couple Instagram stories I was scrolling through today, Paige Beckers was in fact with some Seton Hall kids. So I know she was kind of rushed off the court immediately right after her interview with SNY for the broadcast. She actually ran right past the band because, we were on their way to the locker room. So she ran right past us as she was exiting for the night. But I do know that she went back out there. So at least on that front, Paige Beckers did kind of do the upstanding thing as she did last year. And I know Nick, you mentioned it, but she'd go back out to celebrate the fans, to give thanks to the fans. And it was a big crowd, lots of energy, lots of signs for Paige, obviously, and UConn. But I really think at the end of the day, the band, the Spirit Squads, and the Seton Hall, the bleeding blue fans that were out there did a much better job of, getting their voices heard a little bit more than the UConn fans. At some points, it did get a little quiet from the Pirate fans. And of course, you kind of expect that a little bit. End of the third quarter, beginning of the fourth quarter, we kind of recognized the deficit that we were at. We pretty much knew that the game was probably out of reach. So it did get a little quiet there at the end. Some calls that I know the band, again, didn't agree with. So the band was kind of getting on the refs quite a bit. A lot of the and ones that were happening late into the game that, maybe we didn't necessarily like. But other than that, great energy, great game. And we did better than the last performance, at their place. We scored more. We held them to less. So overall, you want to say it's a positive outcome there, even though it is still a loss. And, we didn't expect to win. A win would have been nice. Not necessarily what we got. But I think we played relatively well.
So what I do every year on the advice of my son, or the last few years because of UConn and Paige, I buy a women's season ticket package. Cost me $100 for the whole year, best deal in the house, and I get and I'm guaranteed a seat to see UConn, Gino, and Paige and everyone. And then last night, believe it or not, I heard people talking, and on the resale market, $500 for a ticket. Well, that's insanity, but that's what we were hearing. So yeah, it was a very hot ticket. It was really standing room only. I'm glad the fire inspector didn't show up last night because there were a lot of people behind the seats that maybe there were too many. Where'd Paul go? Paul went off for a second. Nicole, what are your thoughts about the? I know you're a fan of Paige. What do you think about the game last night? I know you're also a fan of Coach B. What do you think about last night?
I thought that the girls came out with a lot of energy to begin with. The game was pretty close. Usually a point or two were in between what was going on. But it was clear after the second quarter, things were starting to get a little out of hand, and Seton Hall wasn't able to keep up with UConn. But one of the things that I really liked seeing yesterday, it wasn't really so much on the court. It was seeing all the girls that had the matching braids that Paige wears every game. It just shows you how much she's inspired them to want to play basketball and maybe play college hoops one day. I think it's a great way to grow the game, especially in the female market.
Last night at the end of the game, I hung out because I wanted to see what was going to happen with all that. And as Paige got done with her interview, and Nick Morgan can attest to this, all of a sudden there was a screech. The last time I heard a screech like that was when I took my daughters a long time ago to see Justin Bieber. I needed to get an autograph. So it was really like she's a rock star. And again, she's such a great ambassador of college basketball, of the women's game. Paul, your thoughts on the game last night?
Well, you got blown out by UConn. You're in good company. I'm looking at their scores. I just have their season. They beat number 4 South Carolina by 29. They beat St. John's by 38. They beat Butler by 42. They beat Xavier by 56. So this is a team that when they get rolling can blow you right out of the gym. So and they have been playing very, very well since the loss to Tennessee. I think that might have been a little bit of a wake-up call. Nobody's been anywhere near them, and so nobody wants to lose by 45, but you're playing a team that's that's playing as well as any team in the country right now. And certainly it didn't sound like there was a problem with effort on the Seton Hall side. It didn't look like anybody got down. It sounded like that they kept playing as hard as they could the whole game. That's all you can ask for when you're playing a team with more talent than you. I mean, the other piece of it is, when I look again, I'm looking at the statistics, and this kind of speaks to something that you said beforehand, Nick. They got 15 points from Aubrey Griffin in 18 minutes off the bench. They got 14 points from Ashlyn Shade, 18 minutes off the bench. So when you've got that kind of depth, there's only, it's not surprising that Seton Hall got tired in the third quarter and, went into a shooting slump because you're playing a team with so many good players. So, you brush yourself off, you keep going on. I think an NCAA bid is not out of the question. I think a women's NIT bid might actually be something that, it wouldn't surprise me if the Hall could win a second NIT in consecutive years, one on the men's, one on the women's side, if that's where they end up. But, there's no shame in getting beat by a team as good as UConn.
You had mentioned the Griffin girl, and I noticed she was wearing her, that's for those who don't know, Adrian Griffin, who out of Kansas came and played for PJ at Seton Hall. And I noticed she was wearing her dad's number 44. Chris or Nick, was he there? I thought I saw him, but was he in the UConn fan section?
I'm not too sure.
I'm not quite sure either. I will say that after the game that Gino Auriemma did say regarding Aubrey that, well, first off, Coach Bozzella only, and I remember this even from the last time that I covered UConn at Seton Hall, that's this 1920, that he only had nice things to say about Aubrey Griffin, even though, of course, they wanted her to go to Seton Hall. Gino Auriemma, to his credit, did say that I think he knows that if she played every game, Walsh should be a first, second, and third team All-American. And so I just thought that was a funny line. But yeah, she had 50. A lot of that was in quote unquote, I honestly think was pretty late, quote unquote, garbage time. But she was huge down the stretch, really helped put that game away.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, you said, Faith was struggling, but when she's their, third player off the bench, their third big, and Paige has to just battle. It's hard. Chris, let me ask you another question. I noticed that at the end of the first half, Paige started limping off the court, and then again in the third quarter, and she didn't play the fourth. Did they say, and I saw them icing her knees down, did they say anything about that last night in the press conference? Did she address that?
There was no question asked about that. There was no mention of that. I thought I hadn't really noticed I had heard someone on press row mention the limp, I think maybe in the third quarter. Yeah. I didn't quite see it really. I will say I actually did see, this is the second game in a row I've seen Faith Massonis at times limp a little bit. But I wouldn't read much into it, I would say. Again, she, it was a 42-point game. Paige Beckers didn't play the fourth quarter last time either. Right. So I really wouldn't read too much into it.
Nick Morgan, you were right across. Did you notice anything with Paige?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely saw Paige, a couple times she got banged up. I know Jada Eads took a big hit as well to the ground right by the UConn bench. I want to say second or third quarter. She came out briefly. They were looking at her leg. She went right back in, I think after a free throw or something like that, but she didn't miss much time. So I know yesterday they were very aggressive. UConn, there was someone in particular. I think it was Ashlyn Shade came out very aggressive on the defensive end for UConn and was really getting to the best of some of our pirates. I think that was the big hit against Jada Eads. I did see Paige come off with the injury, or not the injuries, but the hobbles a little bit. Jada a little bit. I did see, to Chris's point, Faith Massonis kind of moving a little weird as well. So we'll see if there is any kind of update on that. Nothing that we've heard of as of yet, but definitely did notice that there were some shakeups on both ends.
So you're Coach Bozzella, and that happened, and you have practice, I would assume, this afternoon. What's next? How do you you just put that game behind and move forward? What do you think they were talking about today, guys? Whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think yesterday was an important game, but I think the rest of the schedule is an even more important rest of the schedule and important game. I think you have to focus on the next game because right now Marquette is tied with us for third in the conference. Marquette ends this season away at UConn. So right now, if we can win out and hope that UConn can beat Marquette in that last game, even if Marquette wins every game up until that UConn matchup, we still end third in the conference, which I think is very important. I know Coach Bozzella talked on Bobby's show, the Coach Boz show, that of course the Pirates want a third place finish in the conference because the third place bid for the NCAA tournament is much easier than the fourth place seed in a conference getting that bid. So right now we need to focus on the next game and whoever's up next and the schedule that we have, which is St. John's and DePaul to end out the month. St. John's on Sunday at their place. So we need to make sure that we're going in and we're focusing on St. John's. Obviously, you're probably going to watch some of that tape back. You're going to look at the good stuff. Ayana Lopes was shooting well. Jada Eid shot well from distance. You're going to look at what you could do a little bit differently, but you need to focus on St. John's and winning that game because these games now are extremely important. You want to finish third in the conference. The point differential is also going to come into play potentially for some bubble teams. So Seton Hall losing by 60 the first time to UConn and 40-ish last night. Much better look for us in the second game. So we're trying to get the point differential on our side, also trying to get the record on our side and the finish in the conference. So we want to finish third. Focus on St. John's, focus on DePaul, and then focus on that last game in March against Xavier away. If we can win out, hopefully win the third place, in the conference and maybe get a bid that way. But I'd say you're focusing on the next game more than last night.
Plus, don't you want to be the third seed? I mean, I guess the second seed's out of question, but don't you want to be the third seed because then you're not in the same bracket as UConn, and if you play them, it'll be in the final, right?
Yes, I believe so. I think.
Chris, your thoughts of the future and the possibility of a third seed for this squad?
Yeah, well, look, the truth is, like, they've played really well in their conference schedule this year, generally speaking. Obviously, UConn's an exception. Creighton is, well, look, even for Creighton, they've actually played them pretty competitively so far. I wouldn't rule out Seton Hall making a run to the Big East tournament final if they end up playing, even if they end up playing Creighton, because I think they are capable of knocking off Creighton because look, UConn is the height. UConn is the ceiling. UConn is the benchmark. Right. And they've obviously had at least one half of good basketball against them this season, or at least last night had one half in total of good basketball. I think if they can get their health on track, if they can be more ready to adapt to that sort of trap defense, and if they can get inside, and I think if they're willing to play people like Hunter and Parker Moore, and Nick brought it up, I think that's going to be very important. Another thing that happened last night, UConn really made Seton Hall shoot from the outside. They did not let them get inside. They had to continue taking shots from just inside three-point range or from beyond the perimeter. And that's a big reason why their shots were off. Now, they missed a lot of layups as well, but that was a big killer for them last night. And so it was a snowball effect. So I would say Seton Hall should feel really good about getting the 3 seed. If I'm Coach Bozzella, I'm focusing on the positives of last night, about how well you played UConn for about 20 minutes of that game. And obviously, even with a possibly injured and ill team, I think they are capable of a lot more than people realize. And I think the fact that people are even considering them a bubble team in the NCAA tournament is just remarkable and somewhat outrageous in itself, because they're on pace to win 20, maybe 21 games, which would be far and away their best since they last made the NCAA tournament. And so I think they are definitely good enough to not only get the 3 seed, but to get back to the tournament.
Thank you. Nicole, Nicole, did your sister end up making the game?
No, she didn't, unfortunately.
Was the student section, was there great representation in the student section? Was there competitiveness? How did that work out? Do you know?
I wouldn't know. I wasn't there.
Because we had talked about that, that there was, going to be lined up, first come, first serve. I know the student section and the band and everything was loud, and they did a great job. Nicole, any other thoughts on the future with this squad next few weeks?
I think it's important that we could try to retain as many of our stars as we can. And it would be great to see Faith come back as a grad assistant coach in some capacity to help develop the younger girls. It would help to not just grow the Seton Hall women's team, but also the legacy that they're continuing to make.
Thank you. Paul, your final thoughts on the women before we move on to the men.
Well, I wanted to follow up on what you were talking about at seeding in the Big East tournament. If Seton Hall gets the 3 seed, their first game will be against number 6 DePaul, who's 7-8 right now. Then they would get, the team would be most likely Creighton, and if they can get by Creighton, UConn in the finals. If they finish as a 4 seed, they're going to have to play either 10-5 Villanova or 10-5 Marquette. So that's just a much tougher first round game for the Pirates. Then they'll have UConn in the semifinals. So I think that it's a much easier success path if they could finish third. And as Chris said, the last 3 games of the season are all winnable games. And if they can win out, I don't know how the tiebreakers work in the conference, but if they can win out, end up in the 3rd seed, not have to play Villanova or Marquette in the first round, and then play Creighton in the second round, and then UConn in the finals, it's a much easier path.
Well, remember, they have beaten Marquette already on the road this year.
I do want to jump in really fast.
Yeah, go.
Just to finish things off. Looking up the ESPN bracketology that gets updated twice a week. It's Tuesdays and Fridays. As of right now, Seton Hall is not the first 4 out, nor the next 4 out. What is interesting is Marquette is also not on that list. But Villanova is. They are 8th out right now on the women's bracket. Again, it is going to be updated tomorrow. It doesn't quite make a lot of sense because, Marquette and Seton Hall, both programs are quite better, at least, from what we've seen talent-wise and competition-wise in the games that Seton Hall has played. I'd like to think that Seton Hall and Marquette should get that bid over Villanova 10 times out of 10. Of course, leaning towards the Seton Hall side and more deservingly so. But I do think tomorrow is going to be very interesting when these updates drop to see maybe if we moved up a little bit at all. Just nowhere to be found, I think, is kind of astonishing. I think it's a little bit disrespectful considering the year that we're having. But also, we have another week and a half or so. We have 3 more games to really make our mark here and hopefully reach that 20-win mark and possibly 21. So I do think that's something to watch. I think the Villanova pick definitely is still baffling. And no Marquette, no Seton Hall is kind of crazy. But we'll see tomorrow with those updates. But that's just kind of how we stand right now.
Nick, what's the best we've been so far?
We were at one point the first team out.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And we've dropped a little bit since. I believe maybe right before the first UConn loss, we were up there at first. I don't remember the dates where we were, in each aspect of the bubble or the lack thereof. But we are nowhere to be found for, I think it's gone on 2 or 3 weeks now where we are not anywhere on the list at all.
No, thank you, guys. That was very comprehensive. Good job. Now, moving on to the men, we had our pregame show. The men went up to Wisconsin to play Marquette. And not going to say they came out flat, but again, they we were expecting great things after the win against UConn, for a competitive game. And it just didn't happen. Marquette's a very senior team. They've been able to keep their players. I thought Coleman had a decent game. I was expecting more out of God's will. I think he digressed a little bit, even though, it is his freshman year and he's still learning and there's going to be ups and downs. Paul, what were your feelings? Was it what you expected going in? And what do you think about the men's game? Well,
I thought that Seton Hall would play better. I did not expect them to get behind so quickly. I think that the first half score was they were down 17 at halftime. I didn't expect them to get down that quickly. It turns out that as well as they played in Newark against UConn is as bad as they played in Milwaukee against Marquette, and they haven't done well there at all. But I still was a little bit surprised at how poorly they shot the ball in the first half and how quickly Marquette got ahead and sort of took them out of the game.
Who do you think played well for us? And what were there any bright spots?
Well, I think that, again, in the first half, there wasn't a lot of bright spots. I think that Isaiah Coleman coming up with 13 points and Scotty Middleton coming up with 9 off the bench was helpful. I'm happy when I see the sophomores and freshmen contribute, but I didn't see a lot of defensive pressure. They didn't play well from beginning to end. That was my sense.
Chris Russo, what are your thoughts on the game at Marquette?
I'm not surprised by the outcome necessarily. I thought it was a rough game overall. I am also not really surprised and actually applaud what Shaheen Holloway said, which was pretty much the guys never really came down from the UConn game.
Right.
And I think perhaps they were maybe so caught off guard by it that it just ultimately hurt them. Now, look, the truth is, again, the one thing with the UConn game, it doesn't make a difference as to whether or not you're going to make the NCAA tournament. The only way you make the NCAA tournament is if you win the Big East tournament. But I think these guys were maybe a little bit shocked. And while I think that win does a lot for Seton Hall in the long term, I think it's going to do a great job of keeping guys. And that's going to be the most important thing for this team. It's not this year, unless you can somehow win the Big East tournament. It's going to be next year and beyond.
Right.
But this was a game. I'm not surprised. The Pirates were in for a rude awakening after months of rude awakening, I think, leading up to that. So I'm not particularly surprised by the outcome.
Thank you. Nicole, what's the hockey score?
It is still 1-1. We are at commercial break in the second period.
Thank you. And Nicole, what did you think about the men's game? Were you expecting more from the team?
I mean, I said I believe it was either the pregame show or the Saturday show, whatever show last week, that they can't stay on their high horse and they need to keep themselves level-headed, because if they go in with the mentality that, oh, we just beat UConn, we could beat anyone, it backfired on them. Essentially, they just did not look good at all. And that's saying it with a grain of salt. As much as I love this team, they need to stay focused and they need to play the same way that they played against UConn, but they also can't let those little miracles affect the rest of the season.
Thank you. So Nick, were you expecting the letdown, or and what's the feeling on campus? Were the students, did their hopes get high only to get shot down again? I think Chris made an excellent point with Shaw about the letdown. Were you anticipating that, or were you a little surprised by it?
I mean, I wasn't surprised by the loss. I was surprised by the score. I was surprised by how quickly it kind of felt like that game was over. And especially the feeling at the UConn game with a lot of the students and the band and the student section was, even when we went down by 7, in the second half, it still felt like we were in the game and that we could come back and we win. And of course, there we are. We come back and we force overtime, win by 1. That Marquette game it felt so out of reach so quickly. And I don't know if it was maybe just like the high horse or the mentality of it, or if it was just something in the water. And, UConn does have a very hard time. Hurley has a hard time coaching at Prudential Center. He's been unsuccessful the last 4 years, so maybe that got in his head. Maybe he was kind of overcompensating a little bit. We don't know exactly what that was there. I think it is kind of tough because there's no real, unless there's a watch party on campus, there's not a collective group of people sitting here and watching this game together. So I had the game on while I was doing work in the office, and I, was watching and getting some stuff done for myself. So it was a little tough to kind of watch how quickly it felt out of reach. But I also think, something I speculated on was just the sheer difference in minutes from Godswill. I believe he had 19 minutes in that Marquette game. Gus Yolen was healthy. Gus Yolen actually played in this Marquette game, where UConn, he was absent. He was still present. He was on the sidelines, but he did not play. He was walking around in the boot. Godswill had 19 minutes against Marquette, 38 minutes in overtime play against UConn. I wonder if the lack of consistency and the lack of time on the court is kind of what led to the decline a little bit of his stats and, how he kind of felt on the court there against that Marquette team, because we saw he obviously looked a little bit different. and was not the UConn Godswill Arnarone that we were expecting to see come out kind of for that next campaign. Isaiah Coleman shot, I think, just under 20% from the field. So although he led the team with, I think, 13 points, still not as much as we would have liked out of him. He's our shooter. Kind of needed him to step up a little bit more there. Of course, they are going to kind of get on him heavy, as we saw with Jada Eads against UConn and kind of some of the women's games as of late. And other than that, Cam Jones, I think, had 14 points, and he averages about 18 or 19 a game. So I did like that we were kind of able to contain their star a little bit. But I think maybe the lack of minutes for Godswill, just something I'm going to look at the remainder of the season, see kind of how his minutes compare to, consistency on the court and how he contributes. But I thought that was something interesting just to kind of note moving forward.
Thank you. I think Nicole has an update for us. Go, Nicole.
USA's winning.
Who scored?
Number 85. I can't see the jersey right now.
Jake Sanderson.
Oh, him.
Well, no, now you're rooting for him. During the season, you're not, but now.
I don't like him. I'm sorry.
Well, he just scored a goal for your team, Nicole.
Well, you did not like him starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's loyalties and loyalties. Sometimes they conflict, sometimes they don't.
Once this game is over, I am not rooting for any of the Rangers on this team.
Well, why do you think the Bruin fans are booing Brad Marchand whenever he touches the puck tonight?
They're booing every Canadian touching the puck.
Moving on, I think Chris made a good point about, what do we have to look forward to? And, I'm going to the Big East tournament. I just called on, got my tickets for Wednesday and Thursday. We'll be playing Wednesday. Hopefully we'll have a win and, be able to see them on Thursday. That's always a highlight of my year. But, after that, we have to start thinking whether we want to or not. And I know some people don't, but Chris made a great point. What's this team going to look like next year? And I think there was somebody posted on our board, and Tom Eccles commented on it and got a little upset because, they said that Coleman got an agent. Well, God bless him to get an agent to explore NIL deals. I wouldn't want to, be looking at that money and not have an agent, not have representation. But then our other people said, well, that means he's gone. And I don't necessarily think he's gone. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. I know he has to be a priority. So, Paul, what do you think about Coleman and, the NIL and, is he, our top priority or do you just let him pass and spend the money elsewhere? What would you do?
Well, first of all, I think that keeping the guy who's here and developed here is always good, right? You love your homegrown players. We see him as a freshman. We've seen him develop as a sophomore. We don't really have visibility into what the budget is. And we don't have visibility into post-settlement what the athletic department's contribution is going to be to the NIL. Like, we don't know how much money there's going to be and if it's going to be competitive. Certainly, I would think keeping a guy who's played under Shaw 2 years and, has become the best player on the team would be the top priority. You still have to find somebody to handle the ball. You still have to find somebody who could shoot the three. I think that between Godswill and believe it or not, Gus, the low post play could take care of itself. But yeah, I would think that Coleman would be the top priority simply because he's been here and simply because he's been the best player on the team.
Do you fault him for getting an agent?
Again, we talked about this on the pregame show. If when I was in college, I was a member of the computer club, and if somebody wanted to pay me $100,000 to go to a different college and be a member of the computer club, I probably would have taken the deal.
Sure.
So I certainly can't fault him for doing that. The other thing that I wonder is, do any of you guys know if there are tampering rules? Like, are there schools calling him and contacting him now, or do they have to wait until the season's over before they can start discussions?
Well, you can't. Know. I mean, I guess you could do whatever you want. Backdoor. I guess. Nicole, anything else happen? I see you getting a little agitated down there.
It's a Canada power play, so of course I'm a little agitated right now. And of
Yeah,
course,
I know that there's always stuff, there's way to contact players, but I guess unless somebody's, they're not a free agent until they declare for the portal, right, Chris Russo? That's how it works?
Yes, officially, yes. I would think. I mean, if you don't have any regulations on that NIL really is, then there really have to be There really have to be changes going into the offseason next year. But I would have to imagine that is regulated. I don't know for sure though.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm sorry to jump in here. Weren't there rumors or speculations that St. John's reached out to Kadari very early last year, or is that something I'm thinking about? I could have swore I heard that maybe there was a chance that they were kind of getting their way a little too early on.
I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, but if that did happen, I would think it happened illegally. And on top of that, considering Rick Pitino's past, that would also make a lot of sense.
And I'd like to read a couple of the comments from our man Tom Eccles. First, he's suggesting that Coleman might want to look at who else we bring in and how good the team's going to be, and that might very well play a part into his decision. What's the rest of the supporting cast going to be like? And then the other question is, Tom brings up a great point. If there's tampering rules, who's going to enforce them?
Right.
Because it isn't going to be the NCAA, right? I mean, they haven't shown any willingness to wander into this area at all. So
the fact that Pitino has said the things that he has said, and there has been no action by the NCAA, not even necessarily to punish him, but to make any changes, shows the absolute apathy of the NCAA.
Chris, what are your thoughts on the Coleman situation now?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if you're a Seton Hall fan that he gets an agent. Truthfully, look, if Shaheen Holloway and Brian Felt knew that he was gone, especially with the way this season is, I wouldn't be surprised if they would have kicked him off the team by now and just let him go. Because at least Kadari Richmond last year, hey, they were playing for they deserved to make the NCAA tournament. They didn't. They ended up winning the NIT. With what this team is now, I wouldn't be surprised if they knew Coleman was going to be gone, that they would just kick him off the team at this point. I personally think it could be an advantage because obviously Seton Hall, there have been talks that they've struggled a bit with NIL, and that's not just Seton Hall as a team or as a program or as a school. It's a program or a school of their level, their enrollment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think having an agent for one of your top players, if not your top player, could be used to your advantage. Because the truth is, I've been saying for a long time that it shouldn't be the boosters. It shouldn't be fan funded or anything like that. It should be the university working with the sponsors. It shouldn't be, university paying these kids directly. It doesn't make any sense to me. And the whole NIL situation is good in theory, but it just hasn't worked out, I think, to what it should be, to what it ought to be, what the ideal situation is. And so I think if they can bring in an agent for their best player, and if you're a Seton Hall fan, you're hoping that will help the program figure out NIL as a whole, I think it's probably for the better.
One thing, and I was talking to a big fundraiser, who does it for a living, a professional fundraiser. And what some schools do, and I don't know how they found the loophole with their NIL, is they've made it tax deductible. So the end of the year, Joe Millionaire is looking at, his accountant told him, you should donate X amount of dollars. And he's looking at a place to donate it. And, he's a Seton Hall fan, Seton Hall booster, Seton Hall alum. And he looks over, he's like, wow, okay, maybe I'll go. But then someone says, wait, but if you give it to the Cancer Society or this and that, you'll get the write-off. And I know some schools are allowing the write-off, whatever. Paul, do you know anything about that? Have you heard that?
I have not. I know that when our company had matching gifts, they would match a gift to a university, but they would not match a gift to an athletic department.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know how they would change this or how they would position an NIL collective as a charitable
some
organization.
Schools finagled that. I don't. Yeah, some schools definitely did that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's,
to your
well,
point,
Tom Eccles, if you're there, Tom knows about that.
Tom
I-
did make a comment. He did say revenue sharing starts next season.
Yes. Yes.
I do think for the schools, at least write-off wise, I believe it was Georgia and Alabama are the states that are trying to get the laws passed to make sure that they can kind of use it as write-offs for the players.
Yes.
I believe that's kind of what you're on there, Nick.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it does make sense considering Georgia, again, not to make it political, but obviously those are states where it's more likely that the taxes will be a bit lower as well. And if you think about it, the funny thing is the most powerful conference in basketball this year has been the SEC. And then on top of that, you look at the best ACC schools, and they're primarily in North Carolina or Florida or states like that anyway.
How many SEC schools are going to get in right now? What, Paul or Chris? You guys know?
Last I
I
saw
feel
it was 13.
That's
Yeah, so-
insane.
But
Wow.
Chris, I had a question. You were talking about how NIL works. And what I thought was supposed to happen was that there was going to be money that players were going to get for the use of their name, image, and likeness. Like they had to work for it. They had to make a appearance or
Right.
do an endorsement or sell a jersey. It wasn't supposed to be yeah, in theory, it wasn't supposed to be here's a bunch of money to play basketball. Now, your sense of how that has ended up working out, it doesn't seem like that's what's ended up happening.
No, it doesn't seem. I thought it was going to be conducted through sponsors. I thought maybe the university the particular university could facilitate that, but I thought it was going to be primarily, pretty much entirely through sponsorship. I forget who, but I think it was it Caitlin Clark who I think had commented on this lately, and she had said, well, that was one of the things about it is that someone can't do, pre-NIL couldn't do a commercial for a local coffee shop or something like that, make money off of that. And the truth is that's really, that's really who this is for, especially if you think about not just the athletes, that play football or basketball. Those are the big sports, obviously. But if you think about someone who's, let's say you're someone who plays field hockey at Elmira, and you're the star of the team, and you are asked to do a commercial for a local car dealership. That's what this is really for. That's what this is really supposed to be for. And but Tom did comment a couple of times. He did say not write-offs, but no state income tax. And he also said that Paul's exactly right. Most NIL deals are a sham. And considering I don't think there's nearly enough transparency about it, I would tend to agree with him.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That made sense. Like when Isaiah Whitehead was here, they sold number 15 in the bookstore. He didn't get any money for it, and now he could have gotten money for it. So I totally get that. That's fair. And then I was saying, I thought what Paul said is, a rich guy could have an autograph session in his basement, have player sign 3 autographs and give him $1 million, and there's your NIL because there's no regulation with it. I was talking to a booster from Boston College who explained the collective thing for me. So, this was a few years ago in its infancy. So, people donate to the collective. In our case, it's Onward Setonia. And that money can be used for NIL. So when you go to recruit a player, the coach does his spiel, then he walks out of the room and the NIL guy gives his spiel about NIL possibilities through the collective. So yes, it was, and I heard Brian Feld say, it was never supposed to be tied to recruiting, but it is. And that's what, if it was the way Chris Russo said, that would have been fair. Like if, Gatorade wanted to do Caitlin Clark or Paige Becker's, more power to them. That's what's fair, but it's not. It's become a total sham. And and it's hard to keep up. Nicole, what are your thoughts about Coleman, NIL, students making some money, the whole thing?
I think that students should be able to make money off of their name. And I remember when I was a sophomore, there was a story about, I think it was a Virginia Tech football player. He was engaged. He had a wedding registry up with his fiance, like most normal couples do. And the NCAA actually made him take it down because they claimed that this was in violation of their rules. Now, in some instances like that, it shouldn't be, but what do you call it? That should not have happened. It's a wedding registry. It's not like he's trying to get gifts for what he's doing on the field. He's trying to start his life up after school. And I think that's where most of this NIL has begun, in a sense, because at first it was a lot harder for these athletes to actually be able to put a name out there for themselves and do these kinds of things. But now it's kind of gotten a little out of hand where it's pay to play.
Right. It's gone from one extreme to the other.
Yep.
I remember, when my son went to Seton Hall, he had a friend, well, several friends, but he had a friend on the basketball team. I took them out to lunch. I went to pick up the check like I would, for my son and any other friend. And I'm like going, since I'm a booster, am I like, is this going to be a violation if I pay for this kid's lunch? It's crazy. And now it's just swung the other way. But what I'm happy about is that we are able to have a discussion about it, and just not say, I don't want to talk that, it's not basketball, because it's, what we're dealing with. None of us like it, but it's the reality moving forward. And Nick Morgan, do you see it ending anytime soon or no? You think we just have to adjust?
I think ending is going to be very tough. There's a couple points I want to make really quick about the Coleman agency and stuff. I don't play devil's advocate. I do also play like the optimist, like the Seton Hall optimist here, kind of adding on to some things that were said before. I think an agent for Coleman could be very good because at the end of the day, the agent is mostly there for the brands and the sponsorships that he's getting, not necessarily for the school representation itself. So hopefully an agent coming in for Isaiah Coleman can get him some more local brand deals in like the Seton Hall area or in New Jersey so he can make more money outside of the university. And maybe we could afford to pay him a little bit less and he's willing to take a little bit less because of those sponsorships. Now, granted, are you going to want less money because you can get it more from outside the university? Probably not, but maybe an agent helps reduce the cost just a little bit for Isaiah Coleman, and maybe it helps us retain him. So that's something that I'm looking forward to. Hopefully with an agent that kind of helps Seton Hall more than it does hurt, because I'm looking at it more as looking for the business, the partnerships, and the marketing aspects rather than directly to the school. So I'm really hoping that helps us at least have a better chance of retaining Coleman. Also, I know a point was brought up in the last live show that we did. Rick Pitino does not want to scout high school anymore, which I think is very interesting. And I think maybe it was even Tom or Patrick. I think one of our very, very amazing people that helped run this page. But it was someone in the comments last time that asked, like, do we think Seton Hall should do that as well, not look at high school? And I think that's kind of the opposite approach of what we should be doing. I think if we're looking for the cost effective, and especially, a smaller market team who's struggling with the NIL and can't really compete, I think high school might be our best bet. Not taking strictly from high school, but maybe increasing our presence with the high school talent just a little bit more, because the cheaper, the younger they are, and fortunate to say, a lot of the times the cheaper they're going to be to get, at least to start and break through, especially with just like a 3-star or, a 3-star with upside or a low, overlooked 4-star. But I do think that scouting high school is very important. Pitino said that he has a lot more to kind of recoup for and make up for. He's losing Kajari and some of his other seniors and grad students this year. Whereas us, we don't know exactly what we're losing, but I do think high school recruiting is important. So I wanted to kind of throw that out for you guys. Do you think, there's going to be a change in high school recruits and how like big schools recruit talent and younger talent moving forward? What do you think we should do? What are your thoughts all on that?
I think if you look at it, so if Patino's going for upperclassmen, you're almost doing like the one and done thing that Kentucky did and then Duke did a little bit about, you bring in the high, the McDonald's All-American freshman, number one kid, like a flag, and, 1 year and then he's gone. So, but that's different now because now every player could be 1 year and done. So if you're going to bring in a one and done, maybe you want that player to be a little bit more experienced. So yeah, with Seton Hall, I don't know. Seton Hall's strength has always been, the local kid as a player, and then the bounce back kid. Isaiah Whitehead and Kadeem Carrington and Desi Rodriguez, all came from the New York metropolitan area. And then, John Garcia, we had talked about, he's a little bit older, but he came, we can go on and on and on. Greg Tynes, Glenn Mosley. Our bread and butter was the New York, New Jersey area. And then also the bounce back kid. like the Alamir Dawes, the kid that goes away. Grass isn't always greener. I'm a little homesick. I want to come back. We could still get the bounce back NIL transfer, but we have to pay for it. Paul, what do you think about Pitino saying that? And, is that good for Seton Hall?
So a couple of things. What Pitino did say was, I already have 3 good freshmen I recruited this year. If you look at the whole quote.
Right.
And so I've got my kids. I need to go out and get a leader to replace somebody like Kadari.
Right.
So I don't think he's saying he's never going to look at high school kids, just that's not what he's looking for this year. Now, if I'm coaches in the rest of the country, the first thing I'm doing is taking every one of my junior leaders and finding out how much money they want. Because Pitino's going to come and find one of them and take them over to St. John's. So, but as far as Seton Hall's recruiting is concerned, you remember Howard Schnellenberger when he first went to the University of Miami a long time ago? He talked about doing something he said he wanted to create the state of Miami.
Yes.
Right? Southern Florida was going to be his. Any
Exactly.
kid he wanted in Southern Florida was going to be his.
Right.
It's difficult for us to do that because Rutgers is trying to do the same thing.
But we did it at one point, though. We did get those kids over St. John's and Rutgers. We got Isaiah Whitehead over St. John's.
And I wonder if we could use, one of the things you could use NIL money for is personal appearances.
Right.
I'd like to send Isaiah Coleman on a 50 high school basketball banquet tour of New Jersey. Have the kid in the Seton Hall jacket, giving the speech at the Morristown High School basketball banquet or the Piscataway High School basketball banquet, and try to do what we were talking about before, create some sort of a brand for Seton Hall basketball in New Jersey. And then maybe we start getting kids who we can afford to pay.
Not to cut you off, but in theory, but if you're going to do that in New Jersey, you're not going to Morristown. You're not going to Milburn. You're going to Roselle Catholic. You're going to the big Catholic schools.
Right.
Because that's where the kids go. And
Absolutely.
even in high school, they're becoming one in one school and then going somewhere else. But yes, you do want to build up Seton Hall's brand in New Jersey to make it, a little cachet, and that's the, kids want to stay. Chris, what do you think about the future of Seton Hall's recruiting philosophy, that?
Well, I would say, first off, I just wanted to piggyback on what Nicole said about the whole thing about just the minor payments. Because I'll just say, for example, my mom went to the University of Memphis, so she's a big Memphis fan. And there was that whole thing. I mean, besides, guys getting booked by the NCAA for, paying for kids' lunches.
Right.
Or things like that.
Yeah.
But remember, Penny Hardaway had a thing years ago where he had paid for James Wiseman to be able to move. He paid for his moving costs.
Wasn't there a thing where they paid for someone, they wanted to go to their mother's funeral or their grandmother's funeral or something? And it's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was like he paid for James Wiseman's moving costs in high school, and I will say, I don't remember all the specifics, but look, I guess it's a little concerning because there's a tie. But then, I mean, that fact seems to say. And then on top of that, Wiseman, I'm pretty sure if he ever played for Memphis, it was barely. And then he ended up going straight to the NBA anyway,
right?
And being number one pick and going to Golden State. And the one person that was really affected in all this was Memphis, and so that was the one that was killed. I just wanted to throw that one out there. Look, I think personally, I live in Bergen County. I can tell you a lot of the best Catholic schools. I know Bergen Catholic, Paramus Catholic, Don Bosco, they're no more for football. I can tell you that there are a lot of really good, and maybe most of the best Catholic schools and most of the best high schools for basketball in New Jersey are north of Seton Hall. You could very well make that argument, and they're closer to Seton Hall than they are to Rutgers.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at a school, I think of good schools closer to Rutgers in terms of, athletic schools. I think of hockey schools because I work, down in Monmouth County. You got Christian Brothers and, schools like that. I personally think Seton Hall could be very able to recruit. Truth is, you want to talk about, Paul, you said Schnellenberger recruited South Florida. Seton Hall should recruit North Jersey. All right.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you should also be recruited because you're closer to most of North Jersey than Rutgers is. You're closer than St. John's is. And the truth is that also probably extends to a little bit of Northeast Pennsylvania. And I would say Westchester, maybe even in a Dutchess County, Orange County, and maybe even a little bit of Southwestern Connecticut, because you're looking for a radius here. You're looking for a radius between Seton Hall and UConn, between Seton Hall and St. John's, Seton Hall and Rutgers. I guess to an extent, Seton Hall and Villanova. And then if you go really far north, you probably at a certain point don't really have another really good program until you hit like Syracuse if you're going north and west. And so Seton Hall should have a way larger geographical marker than you could possibly realize. Look, Nicole's a Devil fan, and so I can tell you right now that was a smart way that a lot of minor leagues do it. Minor league teams do it. I worked for the Jersey Shore Blue Claws during the summer, and they're kind of smart because it's a Phillies affiliate, but it's like right straddling the border where it's Philadelphia fans and New York fans. And the Devils were smart enough. They did it. They put a team in Utica. They kind of bounced around upstate New York, especially when they were playing in the Meadowlands. And so they were actually north of the Garden. They were closer to me than, for example, than the Rangers are now that the Devils are in Newark. And so they could actually create a bigger fan base in that area. You need to use the map. You need to use geography in order to attack all of these things. And Seton Hall could very well do that in a much larger part of the Northeast than people realize.
Yeah, and historically, that was what we've done. I mean, Jerry Walker, Jersey City, Terry DeHare, Jersey City, Danley Calandrillo, North Bergen, Glenn Mosley, Irvington. You could go on and on. Herb Pope was from the Philly area. Howard McNeil was from Gloucester, South Jersey. Look at all the names that are. Adrian Griffin was the anomaly. He came from Kansas. Seton Hall under PJ recruited, Luther Wright from Elizabeth. They got all these guys from, the North Jersey, New York metropolitan area. James Major from Brooklyn. And then they supplemented that. PJ went, Arturas Kranisovich from, Russia. So that, Arsef Barnea from Israel. So historically, that's what we've done. Now things, though, are a little bit different because we can still do that. But now Anthony Aven, who were on, radar for his son, came from Newark. We could still do that, but now you just have to come up with money, which makes it harder.
I'm sorry, Nick, you do hope that maybe there's a way to use the NIL to create the brand. Pay Isaiah Coleman, pay the other players on the team to go out to these high schools, give the speech at the assembly or at the basketball banquet or at the whatever it is, and get these kids thinking they're in Seton Hall territory.
Right. But you could promote the brand all you want, and I don't disagree with that. But then at the end of the day, I'm St. John's, I'm, Memphis State. Here's $2 million. Come here. I'm Seton Hall, $1 million. Where the kid's going to go?
Oh, yeah. You still got to be able to pay it at the end of the day. Creating the brand only gets you halfway there.
Right. Nicole, what do you think? Chris, go on.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, Paul brought it up earlier that there's, now in living room, you go to a kid's living room and it seems like it's a head coach comes in and talk, and then it's the NIL person comes in and talk.
Yeah.
The truth is the way it could very easily work is the NIL person comes in and says, hey, we have partnerships with, and the truth is, for example, Seton Hall and Rutgers both have this one, RWJ Barnabas Health. We want you to come in and talk about RWJ Barnabas Health, be a partner with that. Talk about the sponsors that you already have, not we're going to pay you this amount of money. Our boosters are going to throw all this money at you. No, talk about the sponsors you already have, RWJ Barnabas Health. I'm trying to think of a couple more off the top of my head, but I think especially, going to the women's games and seeing how much they've tied in these sponsors now.
Delta Dental's a big one.
Delta Dental. They've done a much better job of that. And that's the way you get these guys. Yeah, they're not flashy, over the top, but are any of these schools that close to look, even St. John's? St. John's is in Queens. It's the biggest school in the biggest city in America. Does St. John's really have any, top tier, unless you're thinking of like Oregon and Nike? I mean, it's not really, you think of schools with major, like over the top sponsors. No, you're thinking of relatively small, kind of local sponsors anyway. But even then, Delta Dental is fairly significant. RWJ Barnabas is mostly limited to the area. And the truth is, that's how you recruit, is you talk about the sponsors that are already in place. And sorry, Nicole had something. Yeah.
Please repeat your question, Nick.
Who had the question? Me?
You were asking me my thoughts on something, but you didn't get to finish.
Oh, what are your thoughts on the NIL Seton Hall moving forward?
I like the ideas of going back to the roots of the high schools because that's where, well, when I first joined Seton Hall as a student, I noticed that a good chunk of our players were from the local area, and I feel like that had some type of resonance with me and my family,
Right.
all that. I think that that's something that's gonna hopefully come back. I hope it's not so much going across the board trying to just scap up whoever you can. I feel like that the heart of the team is if you know who, like where, like when they're from Jersey, they play with grit, like it's the heart of Newark, stuff like that. Even when we had Powell, when Trenton makes the world takes, like it put New Jersey on the map when he was playing for us.
He is Miles Powell. Awesome. And Miles Powell came from Trenton. He wasn't heavily recruited. He came in here 30 pounds overweight. Willard and Shaw spent a summer with him. He lost the weight and he became a superstar.
Yep.
That was a running joke that we actually had at WSOU because it seemed like every national broadcaster would say it. We would always joke and just play it very straight. Hey, did you know that Miles Powell used to be fat? Because it seemed like that's what they would say all the time.
Well, what's the thing? What Trenton makes, the world takes. Gus Johnson was screaming that. Yeah, I long for those days. How many kids from the area are on a team right now? Any?
I don't think so. Not that I could think of.
You don't have that Jersey toughness anymore.
No.
That New York, New Jersey grit.
No.
I mean, come on. And then we went out again, a bounce back kid. Remember Derek Gordon? Derek Gordon came here. He was the glue to that 2016, Big East championship team. So again, a Jersey kid. But the problem with that too is you got to remember, Jersey kids in high school don't stay in Jersey that much anymore. They don't go to St. Anthony's. They go to Monteverde Academy in Florida with Kevin Boyle. So, that's a little bit different too. Everything, like anything else in life, everything changes. Mr. Morgan, your thoughts on NIL, Rick Pitino, Isaiah Coleman, whatever you think, guy.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the roster really quickly, it looks like the only guys we have proximity-wise close to Jersey are Adewusu, who's from the Bronx, and then walk-on David Gabriel, who's a fan favorite. He's from North Bergen, but he walked on. He's not on scholarship. He wasn't a recruit. Everyone else is from out of the country or out of the state. So, and some are considerably far away from New Jersey. So I do think that kind of honing back in on the Jersey pride, I think, can also be very beneficial. Whether it looks like the high school level, and that's I like the idea of having our players go out and present and speak and maybe host clinics or whatever the case may be. Also, like Tony Bozzella, he does a great job recruiting. He talked about going back to Bobby's podcast. I love listening to the Coach Boz show and all that he contributes there. But Tony Bozzella has a great recruiting staff. They picked up Jada Eads, I think Ayana Lopes, and someone else. I could be getting names wrong, but I said I remember listening to one of the episodes where Tony was like, "Yeah, well, we picked up 3 of our starters right now all on the same trip, and we weren't there watching any of them in particular. We just happened to see them and we liked them and we got them and we brought them in." They're talking about how Faith Masonis, has the Jersey connection and again wanting to come back home for that last year or two and kind of spend some time close to home with family. Also, her mom has ties to the school, things like that. And Bozzella has known Faith for a long time, but Bozzella's got a great recruiting program. So maybe taking a page out of his book, having Shaheen and some of his assistants go talk to Tony, be like, "Hey, what do you guys do? What do you guys look for?" Because they're very successful in what they do. And the women's team never fails to bring in good talent, no matter what year or age or whatever the case may be. So maybe it's just as simple as, Coach Shaw walking down the facility and talking to Tony, be like, "Hey, like, what you got for me? What can I learn from you?" Because I think it's very important. And, the women's program does a great job in recruiting. So I do like the Jersey pride. I like the Jersey aspect. I think that's important. And I think it's going to be very tough. And I think a lot of schools are going to pivot to like the 1 year, one and done type mentality that Nick was talking about and everyone was talking about on here. I like Seton Hall and the opportunity to kind of develop and let these guys play out, look 2 or 3 years down the line, look for guys that you can keep Obviously, you know, you don't know exactly who's going to become a star and who's not, but look to see, you know, for the future, you want to build a core, right? And, you know, you don't want to have your Isaiah Coleman surrounded by a team of guys who can't support him. So look for young kids who want to stick together and want to work for Shaw and with Shaw. And I think that's very important.
I was thinking about this, and not to interrupt you, Paul, but if you're gonna get that core players and you want to supplement, what don't we have? And what haven't we had, you know, consistently? Shooters. We need guys who could come and they don't have to be the best athletes, they don't have to be the best basketball players, they don't have to have height. Shoot the three. Just shoot the ball. I mean, like Dalton, you guys remember Dalton Sofer? That was the idea that Willard had with him, except he didn't pan out that well. But shoot the three. Paul, what do you think?
Well, I was just wanted to follow up on something that Chris said, because I think he really got into something very important. Most of the guys on our team are not going to make a living playing basketball professionally. Okay, even the guys, you know, who go to Europe make $4,000 or $5,000 a month. You know, there's, you know, most of the guys who are on our team are going to have to make a living doing something else. We heard Dan Dunn last week talk about the importance of his Seton Hall degree and education and experience.
Right.
And Chris is talking about the relationship Seton Hall has with things like RJW Barnabas and Delta Dental and other employing entities in New Jersey. And if I'm a basketball player and I have any sense, I have to be thinking that I want to be able to take my Seton Hall degree and go to a Seton Hall company, people who I know, and maybe get a leg up in that management job, which is what I'm going to really end up doing for the next 20 or 30 years. And I think that we kind of have to be thinking about the whole person. Dan was talking about this, the whole person, not just the basketball player, and taking advantage of the relationships that we have in New Jersey. So Chris, when you're talking about RJW Barnabas, it's not just an endorsement deal. Maybe it's a management job afterwards. You know, we're going to, we'll find places for you to at least start your career.
No, you make a good point. And just looking at Seton Hall, Mike Enzie's working on Wall Street. Brandon Mobley's a police officer down in Georgia. Yes, you do have to be prepared for life after basketball. But as far as, and he's listening, he might kill me for saying this, but my son, has a 2016, he was a manager on that team, and he had his championship ring. When he would go to job interviews, he would wear the ring. And if the person had anything to do with Seton Hall basketball, the conversation would all of a sudden shift to that ring. Mm-hmm. And you get your foot in the door that way. And that's a wonderful thing. And Seton Hall does need to take advantage with that. And, it's a great school. And, we have a lot of successful alumni, who are basketball fans. So, yes, Paul, that's an excellent point. Guys, we're approaching an hour and 15 minutes. Let's start wrapping this up. Nicole, did Chris Kreider score?
No.
Sorry, Nicole.
I'm hoping it stays that way.
What?
I'm hoping it stays that way.
You are a bastard there, Nick.
Paul, final thoughts.
Well, my final thought is, I wanted to share my NIL story because back before they had that NIL, when I was an undergraduate, we had a kid on our basketball team who wrote a book. He and his friends published their acceptance essays under the title of a book, Essays That Worked. Had nothing to do with basketball. And our coach got a phone call from the NCAA that this guy was profiting by his name, image, and likeness and was going to have his eligibility revoked. Well, our president was a president of our university was A. Bartlett Giamatti, who became the commissioner of baseball. He picked up the phone, called the NCAA compliance office, and said that they had a half an hour to fix this, or he was going to call the New York Times. And his quote was going to be, the NCAA punished a kid for writing a book when nobody at Kentucky or North Carolina has actually read one.
Oh, God.
And that, as they say, was that.
Chris, your final thoughts.
You talking to me? Sorry,
Yeah,
I was
Mr. Russo.
sorry. I was saying, girlfriend. I would say, well, first off, I think now if I have a job interview, I think I may wear my EHL championship ring and my 2 EHLP championship rings. I think that's maybe a good idea. I appreciate that, Nick. Look, if you're a Seton Hall fan, I'd say, look, the fact that we are talking about this stuff right now means that Brian Felt is probably talking about this stuff with his people every day.
Exactly.
And that should give you a very, very bright, sunny future. That should give you a bright idea. So that's I think probably the way you should. That's probably the way I'd put it.
Mr. Morgan, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to take in, a lot to digest. I think there are people, definitely way above us, like Chris just said, that are having conversations like this and are trying to think long term. They're trying to plan ahead, but without looking too far ahead. I think this weekend's got a great bunch of games coming up. The men are taking on Xavier at home, and for us and the ladies, we're going out to St. John's, and that's gonna be a good matchup. And the women really need that win. They are favored, but you don't want to take anything. You want to take everything with a grain of salt, rather. You don't want to get too comfortable, because that's when, you start to kind of lose sight of what's really important. But St. John's win for the women, hopefully, and then trying to close it out strong. And the men, just like to see a nice close game. But right now, trying to avoid the idea of losing Isaiah Coleman or anything like that. Just enjoying, something I talked about last show too, but just enjoying whatever time he has left, whether that's these last little games of the season or whether that's the next year or two or three as a Pirate. But just enjoying the special talent that we have on both sides and everything that we've been grateful to watch with the men and women's program so far this year.
Nicole, final thoughts.
I'm going to use my time to promote our lovely Facebook group. Invite your Pirates friends, alumni, and fans to join the largest and best Seton Hall Pirates group on Facebook, featuring past player profiles from our very own student Isaiah Williams, men's game previews from our very own Art Thomas and Paul, women's previews and post-game analysis from both Isaiah and our very own group expert now, Nick Morgan, HRA Nick Morgan. We have Hall Line callers, Nick from Millburn and Jeff from Point Pleasant, as always. We get direct posts from media members such as Jerry Carino, Asbury Park Press, Jaden Daly from the Daily Dose of Hoops, Bobby Blackjack Garente of Surge Sports, who hosts our program here, Matt Mlodzinski, and Brian Dano Vallis. And lastly, we have our group exclusive live shows, including the Coach Bazzella's show, the Pirates pregame show, and our midweek show, Hall Hoops and Happenings. And stay tuned. We're going to have some really fun guests coming on the show in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Nicole. Great job. And
go USA.
Go USA, USA, USA. Just a shout out to the coach, Tom Eccles. Thank you for supporting all of us, Tom. You're a great guy, and we love you. And Patrick Min, thank you for the kind words and the faith that you have in me and everyone else on this show. For the men, it would be real great to have a win at home against Xavier. A bounce back win. I look forward to the Big East tournament for the men and the women. Go Pirates. This is Nick from Millburn for Paul, Chris, Nick, and the glue of our site, Nicole Gizzi. Everyone have a great night. Thank you all. Great show. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Bye.